1971, Nevada. A Caterpillar D9H is still pushing fill across a tailings dam after hour 10. Blade down, engine loaded. While the wall beneath it is beginning to change shape, the machine was sent there to buy time. What it was really fighting was something the operator could not see. To understand why a Caterpillar D9H was left pushing against a Nevada tailings dam for hour after hour in 1971, you have to begin with the kind of place where failure was never supposed to become visible at all. The site stood in Nevada's hard mining country, where waste was managed with the same industrial confidence that built the mills, the haul roads, and the embankments that held back slurry year after year. Tailings dams were not scenic structures. They were working barriers built to contain the ground fine enough to flow like liquid when mixed with water, crushed rock reduced by milling, saturated waste carried out of the process stream and stored behind earth. On paper, the principle was simple. Raise an embankment. Keep the pond where it belongs. Let solids settle. Keep production moving. But tailings dams do not fail on paper. They fail in the space between design assumptions and field conditions. They fail when water rises where it should not. They fail when saturated material begins to behave less like fill and more like pressure. And when the first signs appear, the crisis rarely looks dramatic. It looks manageable. That is why crews stay too long. By 1971, the Caterpillar D9H was exactly the kind of machine a superintendent wanted near a heavy earth emergency. Introduced in the 1960s, the D9H was not subtle equipment. Depending on configuration, it weighed roughly 47 tons, carried more than 400 flywheel horsepower, and was built to push dense material under sustained load where smaller tractors would simply run out of traction or nerve. In mine work, that mattered. The machine had the mass to hold a line, the blade capacity to move wet fill fast, and the durability to keep working when the job had already turned ugly. And this job was turning ugly. Somewhere behind that Nevada embankment, water and tailings had begun to create the condition every mine crew feared: loss of confidence in the wall itself. Not a routine seep, not ordinary wetness at the toe, a developing instability serious enough that one machine was ordered onto the embankment to hold, build, and buy time. That machine was a D9H. The decision makes sense only if you understand how these emergency earthwork responses usually begin. When a tailings embankment shows distress, the first instinct is not abandonment. It is intervention. Raise the low section. Push more material to the crest. Buttress the weak area. Keep water from overtopping. Reduce the chance that a localized problem becomes a breach. If the wall can be stabilized for another hour, then maybe pumps arrive. Maybe trucks bring more fill. Maybe the pond level stops rising. Maybe the bad section holds through the night. That is how men talk themselves into one more pass. The D9H was sent in because there was no time for a broad, elegant solution. There was only time for steel, weight, blade pressure, and operator judgment. The machine would work the embankment directly, placing material where the wall was softening and trying to preserve enough crest and enough mass to resist what was building behind it. This was not routine grading. It was combat with hydraulic pressure. Mechanically, the problem was this: an earthen tailings dam can look solid while losing strength internally. Saturated fine material does not announce itself with the clarity of broken steel. Water migrates, pore pressure rises, shear strength falls. A section that carried load in the morning can begin deforming by afternoon. What the operator sees from the seat may be limited to subtle signs at first: surface sloughing, wet boil areas, small settlements, changes in blade response, material that no longer packs the way it should. But the machine feels more than the eye sees. A dozer working unstable fill transmits warning through track response, through underblade resistance, through the way the surface moves instead of holding. On paper, a D9H could push enough material to make a difference. On the ground, everything depended on what the embankment was doing underneath that weight, and still the machine stayed for 11 hours, according to later accounts. The D9H remained at the wall, trying to hold a failing situation together long enough for the operation to survive the day. That number matters. 11 hours is not a brief emergency push. It is a long, exhausting campaign inside a narrowing margin, long enough for daylight to change, long enough for confidence to become habit, long enough for a crew to start believing that because the wall has not gone yet, it may not go at all. That is one of the most dangerous conditions on any industrial site. Temporary success, because temporary success disguises acceleration. The operator was not simply pushing dirt, he was reading a structure that was changing under load while his own machine added load to it. Every pass onto the embankment carried a calculation. How close to the soft section? How much material can be placed before the surface starts moving? Is the crest still carrying the machine cleanly? Or is it beginning to flex? Does the blade need to stay low to keep the tractor planted, or high enough to avoid driving weight into material already near failure? Those are not abstract engineering questions in the seat of a dozer. They are survival questions, and they help answer the question that hangs over this story. Why did the operator stay so long? Part of the reason was almost certainly operational culture. Mining crews in that era were expected to work problems, not retreat from them at the first sign of trouble. Another part was the machine itself. A D9H inspires confidence because it can do things lighter tractors cannot. It can push into wet material, climb onto compromised ground, and still feel planted longer than common sense says it should. That strength can save a site. It can also delay the moment when everyone admits the site is already lost. Then there was the wall behind the blade. If the operator left too early, the breach might come sooner. If he stayed, there was still a chance, maybe a small one, maybe a false one, that another pass, another windrow, another few feet of placed fill would keep the embankment standing. So the machine kept working, and the margin kept shrinking. Back at the dam, the situation was no longer just about reinforcement. It was becoming a race between a 47-ton bulldozer and a structure whose internal strength was being erased by water. In the next part, the wall begins to move. The options narrow, and the reason that 11-hour stand ended in collapse becomes impossible to ignore. By late in the operation, the D9H was no longer working on a stable embankment with a weak section. It was working on a weak embankment that still happened to be standing. That distinction matters. An earthen tailings dam can survive visible damage for a while. It can slump, seep, settle, and still hold. What makes the final stage so dangerous is that the structure often gives crews just enough apparent stability to keep committing men and machines to it. The crest remains passable, the blade still bites, material still moves. The wall looks wounded, not dead. Then the margin disappears. Accounts of the incident describe the Caterpillar D9H remaining at the dam for roughly 11 hours, pushing material into the problem area in an effort to keep the embankment from giving way. That number tells you something important about the pace of the failure. This was not a sudden blast of destruction with no warning. It was a progressive crisis, one that let the crew believe intervention might still work. Hour after hour, the machine bought time, but buying time is not the same thing as restoring strength. Mechanically, the problem was getting worse beneath the visible surface. As water pressure built inside the embankment and the saturated tailings behind it continued loading the weak section, the fill the D9H was placing could only do so much. Fresh material on the crest or upstream face adds mass. Sometimes that helps. Sometimes it raises freeboard, slows overtopping, or buttresses a local slump. But if internal pore pressure is rising faster than the structure can drain, added material can also become added load on a section already near shear failure. On paper, the machine was reinforcing the wall. In reality, the machine may have been working on a structure that had already crossed the line between distress and collapse. That is why operators in these situations often describe the ground as changing character. Material that packed earlier in the shift stops taking a clean blade pass. Track response grows less certain. The crest loses its firm, dry sound and starts giving back a softer, hollow answer through the undercarriage. Small cracks appear where the surface should be tight. Wet zones widen. The blade no longer feels like it is building against resistance. It feels like it is placing weight onto something that is moving away underneath it. The machine was fighting physics, not just workload. At some point in those final hours, the operation changed from emergency earth-moving to survival without anyone being able to say exactly when that line was crossed. That is common in failures of saturated ground. There is rarely a single theatrical warning. More often there is a sequence, a little more settlement, a little more seepage, a little less support under the tracks, a little more urgency in every pass. Each sign can be rationalized. Together, they are the warning. Then came the moment the whole story had been moving toward. The failing section let go, whether the final trigger was overtopping, internal erosion, rotational slip, or a combination of all three. The result was the same. The embankment that had carried the D9H through pass after pass lost the strength to remain an embankment. Earth shifted into slurry. The wall ceased to act like a wall. The section under and around the machine began to move. For a dozer operator, that is one of the worst possible failure modes, because the machine is designed for traction on resisting ground. Once the resisting ground becomes flowing material, horsepower stops being the answer. Weight stops being an advantage. A 47-ton tractor can push astonishing loads when the tracks have something solid to react against. In liquefying fill or collapsing embankment material, those same 47 tons become part of what the ground has to swallow. Now the D9H had seconds, not minutes. The operator's final choices would have been brutally limited. Stay on the throttle and try to climb out. Drop the blade for a brace and hope the moldboard catches enough intact material to slow the slide. Turn away from the moving section if there is room, though on a narrow crest that option may barely exist, or leave the machine if the structure is braking too fast to outrun. None of those are good options. They are reactions inside a failure already in progress. If the operator felt the tracks begin to lose clean contact, he would have known immediately that this was no longer a normal bogging or a routine soft spot. The collapsing tailings embankment does not grab a machine the way mud does. It removes the ground in sections. One side settles, the crest cracks, the tractor pitches. Material begins moving with the machine instead of under it. Steering response changes because the tracks are no longer loading evenly. The seat tells the story before the eye can process it, and once a dozer begins sliding with the embankment, recovery from the seat becomes almost entirely dependent on whether any intact ground remains within reach of the tracks or blade. In this case, the machine did not win. The D9H was ultimately lost in the collapse. The 11-hour stand ending not with a stabilized dam, but with a breached structure and a bulldozer taken by the failure it had been sent to resist. That is the part that gives the story its weight. The machine was not abandoned after the event in some distant equipment yard. It was consumed by the event itself, after being used as the last heavy line of defense. The reason matters. This was not simply a case of a bulldozer being overpowered in the vague way people sometimes describe industrial accidents. The machine was defeated by a change in material behavior. Earth became fluid enough, weak enough, and mobile enough that traction, blade force, and machine mass could no longer be converted into control. The D9H did what it was built to do for as long as the embankment remained even partially a structure. Once that structure became moving, saturated failure mass, the terms of the fight changed completely. That is why tailings dam emergencies are so deceptive to machine crews. Heavy equipment can do extraordinary work against visible problems. Low sections, debris, erosion, overtopping channels, slumps, loose rock. But the most dangerous part of a tailings structure is often what cannot be seen from the seat. Internal saturation, rising pore pressure, loss of shear strength, seepage paths cutting through the fill. A wall can look repairable from above while its strength is already being erased from within. After the collapse, the immediate concern would have shifted from saving the structure to accounting for people, downstream effects, and access. Once a breach opens in a tailings dam, the released material does not behave like ordinary floodwater. Depending on solids content, it can move as a dense wave of water, slurry, and fine waste capable of carrying debris, burying channels, and contaminating everything in its path. The machine is no longer the center of the problem. It becomes one consequence among many. But the machine remains the center of the story because it reveals how crews understood the crisis in real time. They believed the wall might still be held. That belief was not irrational. It was rooted in the operational truth that many Earth structures are saved by exactly this kind of intervention. Dozers have stopped overtopping. They have built emergency raises. They have sealed weak sections and bought enough time for pumps, trucks, or drainage measures to work. Sometimes one machine really does make the difference. That possibility is what keeps operators in the seat longer than outsiders expect, and that is also what makes these stories tragic. The same judgment that saves one site can trap a crew on the next one, because the visible signs of distress can look similar while the internal mechanics are completely different. The site is quiet now. The D9H's 11-hour stand survives mostly as a hard industrial memory, a bulldozer on a tailings wall, holding on longer than the wall itself. What remained afterward was not proof that the machine failed. It was proof that there are conditions in which even one of Caterpillar's heaviest production tractors is reduced to the same terms as everything else on site: ground, water, load, and time. The machine is gone. The lesson is not. An embankment under hydraulic distress does not care how much horsepower is on the crest if internal strength is already collapsing. A dozer can raise a wall. It cannot restore soil mechanics that have already been lost. And when a crew mistakes temporary resistance for renewed stability, the most capable machine on the property can become the final witness to the failure instead of the solution. That is why this D9H still matters. Not because it was invincible, but because it was not. It stood exactly where crews put it when the problem looked barely survivable, and worked until the structure beneath it stopped being a structure at all. And this would not be the last time a bulldozer was asked to fight a wall already losing its battle with water.